my name is Tom Pronk, and this is my wife Shelley, and we have been gardening and composting for almost 30 years, I guess. And one of the things about composting, some of you guys might have gone to Mary McIntyre's compost class last year. Anybody takers? Anybody there? Yeah. And she talked a lot about leaf composting and things like that. And we do use leaves in our compost. And what I do, I gather them up in the fall and I put them in one of those bins. And then I cover it up and I leave them there. And then I just keep adding to my compost as we make compost. And I'm going to pass this around and you can feel and touch that. And that's the compost we make. And this is last year's compost, and I had to scrape some together from a patch in the garden. And but I have some new compost here too. And typically compost, like I said, there's no wrong way to compost, and it takes, if you leave it like this, it'll take you a year to compost this. Now in our compost, and this compost was started when I dug up the garden, sort of like the beginning of May. So this is 2 months old, and I could sieve that, and I will do that later. I brought my sieve, and you could probably use it because it's ready to go. And so that's about 8 weeks. If you want to know a lot about compost, there's like tons and tons of literature. I put a couple of websites on this page. If you want to know everything about composting, you read the Rodale Guide to Composting, and it's also marked on the top here. And that's like the Bible of composting. And that compost, that book on composting was published first in 1979 or something like that. And there's an updated version in 1992 or so. And it explains everything, what you can do about getting your compost going quicker, layering it, lifting it up, turning it over. And we've tried a lot of those different things. Now these are our compost bins, and I'll pass this around too, and people can have a look at it. I'll pass one this way and one this way. And our compost bins are built out of recycled materials. And one thing you notice, the difference between those compost bins and these ones, ours are totally closed in. And the reason why I close my compost in, because you see on the little sheet, the 4 pillars of composting: bacteria and worms, and I have some worms with me too, so I'll show them later. Organic matter, brown and green, and we'll talk about that. Oxygen and moisture. And the only way you can control moisture in your compost pile is if you have control over the elements, right? And here, you have no control. I dug my shovel or my fork into that pile, and you can put your hands in this all the way down, and it's cold. I dug up this compost at 4:30, and the steam was coming off it. So it was probably like 55, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in centigrade. Probably almost 30. But it gets a lot hotter than that. And so you build bins, and the nice thing about this, they're open on the front, and that's a nice thing because you can add things and take things out. So what I do, I put a couple of 2x2s on the end, and then just slide things like slats of wood or plywood to cover up the fronts. And the things that go in compost, all the brown stuff that you get out of your garden, and all the green stuff that comes out of your garden, and everything out of the kitchen. And composting is good for your garden, but it's also very good. The other side of composting, that's on the bottom of your sheet here, is it's the only way to reduce your waste to more than 50, or reduce your waste more than 50%. And that's why a lot of communities have picked up composting. Now Ferriton has chosen not to have pick up compost on the curbside because it's extremely expensive. Because there's a lot of transportation involved, manpower, and the best way to compost is like this, because there's no transportation involved. You take it from your garden or your kitchen, you put it in there, you work it, and you put it back on. So it covers a lot of, and it takes out a lot of expenditures. Most people, when they mow their lawn now, they mulch it, right? You guys all who mows the lawn here?
I mulch all.
You mulch everybody mulches their grass?
Yeah.
Well, see, I have an old lawnmower, and I don't like to. Well, we have actually 2 lawnmowers because we inherited one. But my old lawnmower, I mow when the grass is high like it is right now, and then later this week when it hopefully dries up a little bit, we'll mow the grass and you try to mow it so it gets left in little rows, and I rake it up and I put it in my compost. Because this time of year, you need a lot of green stuff to go in your compost, right? Because you know, I have tons of leaves that I need to get rid of, so I mix that in with kitchen scraps and then the grass and things like that. And so if you want to have green stuff, you can also we have a couple of hedges, and before the branches go to wood, you snip them off and you throw them in your compost, because all that green stuff, and that's do it like something like this. What was that, huh?
Nothing.
I wondered when we could ask questions.
Oh, you can ask questions anytime. Just raise your hand.
Okay, when you mentioned leaves, where my leaves fall, there's pine needles also that fall.
Yeah.
Is that okay to compost?
Yeah, you can put pine needles in there. They take a little bit longer, and they're acid, right? So you don't want to have too much of them. We used to have a little pine tree in our backyard. We actually cut it down because it was killing some of the grass. But we have an ash tree, a couple of birches, and we got tons of oak leaves and maple leaves from our neighbors that blow into our garden. And so yeah, you put them all in a pile or put them in a couple of large garbage bags. You can save them from when you add them to your compost. Like this time of year, especially like here, this is way too wet now, right? So if you have dry leaves and you add them to it, they soak up the moisture. So that's a good thing to do.
Oak leaves take a while too.
Oak leaves take a longer time to compost. I have never had problems getting rid of all my leaves, and they're composted by like next spring. So it takes less than it takes a little bit. For some of them, it takes more than a year from the time they fall off, and then about 16 months probably. But I get rid of them all before the fall, and that box is empty.
And I got bags 5 years, 6 years old that haven't been opened yet.
So they should be pretty
They
much.
should be rich.
They should be maybe good. If you would have added worms to it, they would have been good.
Probably the worms have been into it already.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And that's the other thing. Like you can just take leaves and have like leaf compost, like or leaf mold they call it, and you just pile it in the corner of your garden, and it will degrade over time. But it takes about 2 years to do that. So, but if you want quick compost. The guy, anybody here heard of the Four Season Gardener in Portland? Him and his wife, they're both writers, and they've written some books about it. And he says the secret to a garden that produces like all year long is good compost. And he says you can make compost in 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. And this is the proof that you actually can. You know, and I'll show you that later. So that's the moisture part. Like we have no control over the moisture here, so it's really hard to get the compost to get hot, right? So the other thing is oxygen. Now, does anybody ever turn this pile, Shane? Like really turn it?
Well, those are just pickups, like stuff to put stuff in, and that's the real one.
Right. Yeah. So people put stuff in it.
Yeah.
And I see there's big branches on the bottom here, and that's
Yeah.
good because you want some drainage on the bottom of your pile. So oxygen. I typically flip over my compost with my pitchfork every 4 or 5 days or so, and try to add some green stuff to it. So you generate some heat with the nitrogen and the bacteria that tackle that green stuff. And then if I notice that it's getting too moist because maybe we put too much kitchen waste in it. Or the other thing I do, I have a big bucket at the office, and people throw all their organic stuff in there, so I take that home with me. The coffee room, I take all the coffee grinds from the coffee room, because you know it's a good resource, right? And otherwise it will just go in the garbage. And coffee grinds are great for your compost.
Is that brown? Coffee grounds considered brown? I have a hard time getting enough brown. I can get all kinds of green from the
Right.
kitchen, but brown.
And you don't have access to leaves.